Hi all, welcome back to Make More Bonsai. John here. We have something fun on the studio workbench today, and we'll talk about some designerific things to think about when getting down to business with this little juniper. We're going to make some adjustments to its design to emphasize that cool looking lower trunk and update the branches to harmonize with it and bring them into proportion with the overall size of the tree. All to bring balance and maybe some conceptual clarity to the overall composition of this updated concept. This Kishu Shimpaku Juniper has been left alone all year to allow it to build up some strength for this upcoming session. I mean, it wasn't ignored, it was watered and fertilized. I just didn't perform any foliage styling all year to encourage it to gather energy to give us lots of choices when it's time to style. And that time is now. It's winter, and the tree is dormant. Here in Texas, winter is really about a month and a half of cold nights and kinda cool days, with occasional freezes peppered in to keep things interesting. We maybe see 2 weeks in a row of temperatures below freezing, but if you live somewhere that has a longer winter, be prepared to offer some protection from freezing cold after performing any styling work. With the setup out of the way, let's elevate this tree to eye level on the old milk crate and take a moment to appreciate that lower trunk. It's really attractive under all that foliage. It rises and starts to bend in all directions with groovy twists and some Shari deadwood that turns along with it. I really want to emphasize that and draw even more attention to it. From this front angle, we can see there is a branch that extends to the left, making a foliage mass that creates an extended asymmetrical triangle, which is a desired look for bonsai. The more asymmetrical the better, right? That branch, however, originates more from the back of the trunk, which again, it's fine, really. It provides depth as well as gives the foliage that extension to the left. It seems all the boxes are checked in the "this is a good looking bonsai" checklist. I think we could take this tree a little further, refine its look, and end up with something that's a little more satisfying. If we cover up that branch on the far left and make the foliage profile it creates disappear, we can already see that the foliage mass maybe feels more proportional to the size of the trunk. It also harmonizes a bit better with the story the trunk is telling, a story of harsh conditions that twists and causes portions of the trunk to die back. So much foliage sorta conflicts with that story. Shorter branches and smaller clumps of foliage would match those conditions more, rather than be so lush and full. So, ditching that massive foliage would enhance the story. It would also improve the overall impact of the design by adding some negative space to build some tension within the positive space created by the foliage masses, and present us with an awesome opportunity to add more character to the trunk by creating some additional Shari. And what's better than some Shari on a juniper bonsai? Yep. More Shari. So, without further delay, let's commit to eliminating that unnecessary branch and see if we can deliver on the promise of more Shari. I say see if we can deliver on the promise because in order to really make this Shari idea sing, it has to be visible from the front of the tree. If it's hidden in the back, we're not really making much of an impact on the look of the trunk. Committing to exposing more of the trunk to show off the angle changes and Shari is part of what motivated this change in the first place. Now that more trunk is visible, what would really push the design over the top would be Shari taking up some of that newly visible trunk space. This is where it gets interesting. There's a live vein that was supporting the branch that was just removed. The challenge now is to locate some of that tissue and follow its path down through the rest of the trunk and remove just that tissue, and not interrupt the flow of water and nutrients that supports the rest of the tree. We can see how the trunk twist kinda loops around and over to return back toward the center. That was created when the tree was a young cutting. It was wired to create curves in the trunk years ago, and while those curves were being made, the trunk was also twisted slightly with each curvy bend to enhance the extremity of each bend. How do I know this? A, because I did that on this tree like 20 years ago, and 2, you can see the grain of the bark has this curvature. Seeing the grain direction shift is the important takeaway hint. Me patting myself on the back for having the gumption to even do this twisty stuff is more of a side note, but maybe a reminder that everything that you get up to when growing and training bonsai can have some intention built into your work that gets built upon year over year. If you perform a task, however small, when styling a bonsai, if you take a sec and embrace a measure twice, cut once mindset and execute with care, when you return to that tree, even decades later, you'll be grateful that you gave it that extra nudge of effort. But enough of this palaver. Let's see how we can discover this live vein so we can exploit it in the design. Very often I see a Shari demo in which the demoer is kind of cutting into the trunk with a blade and removing the bark and cambium beneath. And that's fine really, especially if the trunk is relatively straightish and has a clear grain direction. The odds of messing up any live vein support for branches are pretty low in that situation. That approach can kind of limit an opportunity to capture a more natural looking effect, and on this particular tree, I want to avoid doing any damage to the living cambium that's supporting the remaining branches on the bonsai. So let's proceed using the tree itself as a guide. To start, I'm going to break away the branches, allowing the twisting and crushing movement of the pliers to influence where they break off. It's winter, so the cambium is rather firmly stuck to the main wood of the branches. If I were doing this in springtime, the cambium would be flooded with moisture as it's aggressively moving water throughout the tree. It would peel off really easily, which would also increase my chance of taking off too much. When it's stubborn, like when it's dormant, we can carefully analyze the direction of the cambium grain as we go and be much more selective. Now that the connection of the cambium is disturbed, it starts to reveal an ideal place to start to work downward into a Shari. Using pliers, carefully bite into the hanging thread of tissue from the bottom of the branch and gently pull to reveal the channel the grain follows. From here, we can remove tissue from the top of the branch. This now reveals the grain to follow until there's no more to remove. You'll know this because the grain will stop and the tissue you're removing will kind of come to an end. I'm going to remove the remaining cambium tissue with a carving tool, but a small one. I'm using this very small dental scraper that I've sharpened to get into tiny nooks. You can use any kind of carving tool or blade you're comfortable using. The goal for this time of year is to remove as much as possible but not get caught up in the details, just make it neat. Through the next few months into spring, the live tissue will callus and start to swell around the remaining living portion while the exposed portion dries out. The result is what now looks like an extension of the Shari below it, and now looks like it is wrapped around the trunk following the grain of the wood. This lower trunk now has some additional features that will only get better with age. Over time, the live sections will callus and lump up around the initial Shari. We can continue to enhance these areas into the future by removing some of the callus tissue that grows over the Shari and add even more texture to the Shari area, much like the older Shari below. Now that we've committed to the restyle by removing that unneeded foliage mass and making that Shari, the rest of the tree needs to be set up to bring the branches into proportion within the new design to kind of reset the positive and negative space within the bonsai. Many of the existing branches are a bit too long. We're going to begin the process of shortening and raising some branches into spaces that receive light to fill in to create a proportional composition. This action taken now will ensure only needed growth will advance through spring and summer the following year. For that, we need to improve the airflow and light penetration into areas we want to develop so that we can see constructive advancement in our design that will help guide all of the design decisions we make after the spring flush of new growth has matured. So let's focus on where to remove foliage, as little foliage as possible to maintain health, but also enhance the design. To start with, any foliage that's on the bottom of a branch is a good place to begin. This foliage exists mostly in the shade with way less light to trigger photosynthesis, so it is the least efficient at providing for the tree compared to the foliage that has more access to light. By removing these, we also enhance the design by creating a clean line on the underside of the branches. Our next choice of foliage to target for removal would be any weak growth. Thin strands that aren't branching and are a bit less rich in color can be removed. These weak branches can actually use more resources to stay alive than contribute to the growth of the tree, so they won't be missed. Now let's look to make choices that enhance the design of the branches. If we examine a branch and we see any growth that is opposite one another, let's remove one side of it. This will help create an alternating branch pattern that will appear more natural and less symmetrical. This also opens the area for more airflow, as well as space for new growth to fill from the remaining alternating branches. Okay, now look for growth that's popping up between branches. This crotch growth can actually make the branch swell in that area, which creates a kind of fattening that can reverse the taper of the branch, interrupting the clean structure of the branch design. If it's present between two branches that you wish to keep, removing it will prevent any weird swelling and improve airflow among the surrounding branches. Crotch growth can also be a valuable tool as well. If a branch is too long or out of proportion, that emerging bud can be used to replace that branch with new, shorter branches. I'm actively seeking out opportunities to reduce the length of some branches so these new potential branches that are emerging from the crotches become kind of valuable. Removing an older branch and allowing that new growing bud to extend is how we can easily reduce the length of branches to bring them into a more compact foliage profile. All these choices lead to leaving behind the strongest foliage to continue to energize the tree and create new healthy foliage to fill the spaces that have been opened up for it. We've also eliminated weak growth that may be susceptible to disease or inviting mites or other insects to start their colonies on. Next is some energy management. At the tips of each branch is a bud. That bud contains a hormone called auxin. That hormone suppresses the growth of the buds further down the branch, so all the energy flowing through the branch favors that bud. If you want that branch to expand, leave it alone and it will continue to extend and get longer. If you prefer the branches on the interior to receive more energy, remove that bud on the tip of that branch and the energy will be redirected to the buds along the length of the branch. This hormone tends to favor the top of the tree since there's way more access to sunlight. Over the course of the tree's life, it will begin to shed lower branches to favor the upper branches' ready access to light. This is built into the tree and will always be how it behaves. In the world of bonsai, we need to be aware of this and always work toward balancing energy throughout the tree, because we want to preserve the good-looking lower branches of a bonsai to keep it, looking like a big tree but small. During these trimming sessions, special attention is placed on keeping these aggressive apical buds in check. These buds are collecting the most energy and have the highest concentration of auxin. This means removing any aggressive-looking pointy tips that tend to reside at the top of the bonsai. By removing these sugar hog tips, energy is redirected to buds throughout the tree more evenly, which enables the lower branches to compete for resources at a similar rate as the apex. Okay, so now the structure of the tree's concept has been updated with a new aesthetic addition, and the basic house cleaning and setup for the health of the rest of the tree is in order. It's time to place branches where they will make sense within the design, and also thrive and reach a satisfying state in the coming growing season. What do I mean by making sense within the design? That's kind of a loaded question.
Johnny, what can you make out of this?
This? Well, I could make a cap, or a brooch, a pterodactyl.
I mean, it could mean anything. Imagination does have a major role in design. It's pretty rare for two artists to do exactly the same thing, and in bonsai there is a model to sort of follow, which does help with a place to start, but how does it fit in with this particular bonsai? It's not like this is a collected from the wild specimen that has lots of other influences driving the conceptual form of the bonsai. This is a juniper that was grown and trained specifically for this one purpose, to one day be a groovy looking bonsai. From the perspective of, I'm designing a bonsai out of material that I can do whatever I want with what I have, let's talk a little bit about composition and proportion. So, here's a lovely panoramic image of the Mojave Desert. We can see there's a big kind of hazy blue sky, an expanse of yellow ochre earth, and a scattering of green grasses and trees. If we view it with the horizon centered, what information is delivered? What if that horizon is way lower in the frame? Does this deliver different information? Now let's raise the horizon. That is also delivering the information differently. Composition is a useful tool to deliver information. Now let's add proportion to the party. This includes proportion of mass and proportion of color. If each of these masses or colors are presented in an equal proportion, what we see is symmetry, everything of equal prominence, a dynamic of, even distribution. The eye is not really drawn to anything in particular, not anticipating any action or change, which is fine if that's the information you want to deliver. To change that story, to add some dynamic influence over where your eye should go, a kind of hierarchy of importance, altering the proportions to drive expectations and anticipation of action of some kind, an asymmetric arrangement of those proportions is a tool that can be used to deliver that information. In bonsai, arranging the branches in an asymmetric manner to create tension is sort of well known. To create your tree into an asymmetrical triangle, and you have successfully crafted a bonsai. Let's take this out of the realm of just craft and add a more fully fleshed out design aesthetic, one that departs from the blanket statement of arranging the branches in an asymmetric manner, because sometimes a design demands more. To do this, consider not only an asymmetric mass of foliage, but the volume and proportion of the mass and color. And one can fiddle around with these proportions all the livelong day, or we can have a useful launching point to start with and just adjust if needed to fit the design. Let's take a look at the shot composition from an old sci-fi movie I hope no one will mind I use as an example. It contains three colors, a deep red, a kind of mid-tone grayish white, and some yellow lights. These colors fill the frame asymmetrically to deliver its message pretty clearly. There's action going on. It looks like the fellow on the left is grabbing a printed computer readout in a really big red room. So it must be something important because that room is oppressively big and red. And where is the computer? It's all those yellow lights flashing on and off in random bits and byte patterns. These colors fill the frame proportionally to deliver the information at a glance. If the full frame is 100%, the red is taken up about 60%, the gray is taking up about 30%, and the yellow is taking up about 10%. This 60-30-10 proportion is a very useful tool to use as a starting point to deliver information in a dynamic manner. What makes a shot so dynamic, it's not just the proportions of color, it's also how everything is arranged. We can see the hierarchy of action, of what to pay attention to given the information, on how the clumps of color are arranged in an asymmetrical triangle within the frame. More stuff is here, less stuff is here, and this stuff draws our eye across the frame, mostly due to its deviation in color and proportion from the other stuff. So, now that I've carried on about the volume and proportion of mass and color, let's apply that to this little bonsai. Consider the 60% proportion on the tree would be the massive green foliage. The 30% would be the brown trunk and pot, and the 10% would be the Jin and Shari, since it's a color deviation from the larger masses of green and brown. We can arrange the branches and foliage into asymmetrical groupings using wire to pull together the story of the bonsai. One grouping of the main branch and a second grouping above it to be the apex. Using copper wire, I'm wrapping the wire along the length of the branches with a spacing of the loops about 45 to 50 degrees. The main branches are not particularly thick, so they'll be easy to move into a new position that gives them access to enough light to encourage new buds to form that can be used to maybe reduce the length of some of the branches to bring them into proportion with the trunk. If the branches were a bit shorter, the tree will read as taller and the trunk will read as thicker. Right now, the branches at their current length are decorative and functional, but not contributing to making the trunk look larger. The strongest story for this tree lies in the trunk, and how it would naturally end up in the configuration of one long branch low on the trunk, and a series of angle changes and weather effects that led to its current state. I think shorter branches overall would reinforce that narrative. I hope to reduce the length of some of the upper branches in late summer by using some of the crotch growth that was left on the tree to grow and extend. For this session, I'm just positioning the branches where they should be when the new growth from spring tells us what to do next. After the new growth has hardened off in summer, I'll return to this tree to see what has developed and respond with some pruning to help bring that picture into clearer focus, all the while keeping that basis of a 60-30-10 proportion ratio in mind. That dynamic proportion ratio is more of a starting point, especially if you're not really sure where to start. You can play with that balance as well as depending on what emotion you're trying to convey. Not just locked into an action-packed dynamic, you can experiment with other ratios like even 33% across the design, or limit the ratio to 2 instead of 3 percentages and see what this perspective inspires. I'm curious what you come up with. Please comment below with your thoughts. This is a fun discussion to have for sure. With all the branches wired and placed in updated locations that can help highlight the new Shari on the trunk, the last little bit of adjusting will be to the apex. I want to encourage some new buds to form and see if I can reduce the height a bit using some new growth there as well, but that'll have to wait until summer for us to see any results. We've really covered a lot of different detail-oriented topics with this little tree driving the discussion. I hope to hear from you and what you think about all the things we did today, from gin and Shari making to overall composition design theory, a whole heaping helping of food for thought, so please share. This little bonsai will overwinter outside. When it gets below freezing, it'll spend the rest of the winter on the ground. For now, however, it's back on the bench for some recovery time as it waits for spring. Thanks for watching. I hope you gained some helpful insights from this little video. Maybe like and subscribe and leave a comment below, and possibly check out the book or the t-shirt and hat links in the show more section below. There's even a super thanks option. Special shout out to everyone who hit that heart button. Your contributions go a long way to keep things moving ever forward with this channel. All participation and support really helps energize this little production and helps me dream up new stuff to show you, because bonsai stuff is kinda cool, and so are you for helping support this channel.